Chapter 11, Jungle Clue. "Where's George?" asked Bert, walking up to Nancy and Ned. He had gone inside the inn to get more film. "Why, I don't know," Nancy replied, looking along the dark porch. "Last I noticed, she was walking up and down." The group continued to watch the elephants. The rhinos had left, and now the big beasts went to the water hole to suck up the saline water through their trunks. "Aren't their babies cute?" said Bess, shooting a flashbulb picture of two who had waded into the hole with their mother and were spraying water over their backs. Presently, Nancy became uneasy over George. Quickly, she left her chair and searched throughout the inn for her friend. George was not in sight. Is it possible she disobeyed the White Hunter's orders, went down the steps and onto the ground? Nancy thought worriedly. She came back and mentioned it to her friends. Bess spoke up in defense of her cousin. "George wouldn't do such a foolish thing," she said. Her friends agreed, but wondered why she had disappeared. Nancy decided they had better tell the White Hunter. They found him talking to his wife. "This is serious," he said. "I will go downstairs and take a look." Swinging his rifle over a shoulder, he hurried off. Just as he reached the top of the stairs, he met George coming up. The White Hunter said sternly, "It is the rule here that no one leave these premises." "Please, Mr. Zucker," George pleaded. "I didn't go of my own will. Let me tell my story." She went into the lounge, and when everyone was seated, related how the baboon had carried her over the railing and down to the ground. "Then he ran off with me." Bess gave a cry of dismay. "That's horrible! How did you get away?" George said that when they were a little distance from treetops, suddenly the baboon had begun to talk. I couldn't understand him, but I knew then that he was a man in disguise and not a baboon. Bert's face was livid. He declared that he was going out and find that human beast and give him what he deserves. Mr. Zucker put a stop to this idea at once. "It would be extremely dangerous," he said. "The jungle is alive at night with preying animals. You might easily be a victim." George looked at Bert. "Thanks a lot, but since I'm safe, let's call it quits." "Tell us how you got loose," Nancy begged. George said that as soon as she realized the baboon was a man in disguise, an idea came to her. If the headpiece were twisted, he would not be able to see. "So I gave it a sudden yank sideways. He was so surprised he let go of me. I ran back here as fast as I could." "Thank goodness you are safe," Mrs. Zucker said. "George, can you remember any of the words the man said to you?" "I don't think he was talking to me," George replied. "He seemed to be muttering to himself." She thought a moment, then repeated a few of the words she could remember. "That's Swahili," Mrs. Zucker said. "Kwahere means goodbye." The White Hunter said to his wife, "Do you remember that man from Mombasa who was a combination strongman and acrobat in the traveling circus?" Mrs. Zucker nodded. "You mean the one they called Swahili Joe?" Nancy and her friends were startled when they heard the name. If the man in baboon disguise had been Swahili Joe, then he had followed the young people to treetops and intended to harm them. "Tell us more about him," Nancy requested. Mr. Zucker said that Swahili Joe had been a fine person and an excellent performer. Unfortunately, he had a bad fall, and it was reported he was not well coordinated after that and had to leave the circus. Nancy thought, then he'd take orders from Jahan and Don, not realizing what harm he's doing. "I wish I had seen this baboon fellow," said Ned. "He and I would have recognized each other." Professor and Mrs. Stanley had heard rumors of George's absence, and now came to learn more about it. They were thunderstruck and alarmed by the story. "I had no idea," said Aunt Millie, "that this trip would involve any of you in so much danger." "I know it's all my fault," Nancy spoke up. "I'm dreadfully sorry." George came to Nancy's defense. "You had nothing to do with that baboon man coming here and carting me off." Nancy was unconvinced. She had felt for some time that to hunt for her enemies would not be necessary because they would come after her. "Maybe I should take the initiative," she thought, but did not express this idea aloud for fear of alarming the others. Bess could see that Nancy was upset. To dispel the tenseness of the situation, she said, "Oh, to be an elephant with no worries." "That's where you're wrong," Professor Stanley told her. "Did you ever hear what happens to the ex-leaders of herds?" Bess shook her head. The professor went on. "When a bull elephant becomes old and a young buck wants to become the leader, he fights his way to the top and forces the old fellow out. No one in the herd dares come to his defense. It seems to be the law, and nobody breaks it." "What happens to the poor old elephant that's out of a job?" Bess asked. Professor Stanley said that he had to become a lone wanderer. They often grieve so much that they don't eat and starve to death. "Oh," Bess exclaimed, "that whole system is very cruel." "Nature," said the professor, "often does seem cruel. But we must remember the natural laws which bring about a balance of life on this earth. If there weren't such a thing, the whole world would be in chaos." He stopped speaking as a horrible, screaming laugh from somewhere in the jungle reached their ears. "What's that?" Bess queried. "A hyena," the white hunter replied. He and his wife looked at each other. Nancy was sure they were wondering how Swahili Joe had fared. Had some wild beast got the man's scent and come for him? Although Nancy disliked Swahili Joe intensely, the thought of such a horrible death for him made her shiver. Then, thinking of what he had been guilty of, she began to reflect who was more cruel and cunning, the wild animals or man. Ned interrupted her train of thought and said, "Let's go watch the elephants some more. I want to take a few more pictures." They returned to the porch and watched. It seemed to the young people as if the elephants would never get enough water to drink. They moved around very little, and only once in a while did they trumpet. This happened when one of them was annoyed by another elephant. Although Nancy enjoyed the mystical scene in front of her, lighted only by the dim yellow glow of subdued searchlights, her mind kept reverting to the spider sapphire mystery. Here she was in the middle of the jungle, and yet the mystery had pursued her on 2 occasions. First, she had been told by one of the Indian guests that he believed there was a fraud in connection with the reported theft of the gem. Then the man believed to be Swahili Joe had suddenly appeared. "It's all very weird," she thought. The following morning, Nancy and the rest of the Emerson group were up early. At breakfast, they recounted the various activities of the animals which they had seen. Nancy hardly took part in the conversation. Her mind was still on the mystery. Now she was going back to Nairobi to hear the strange story of Tazam's disappearance. That afternoon, Nancy and her friends went to have tea with Mrs. Munger. Their hostess proved to be a charming woman who was very well informed on the subjects of African history and jungle lore. After tea had been served, she began her story. The guide Tazam had been an unusually intelligent and helpful one. Her safari had reached a rest camp, and Tazam had gone off by himself. "Unfortunately, he never returned," Mrs. Munger said. "We felt very sad about it. After we waited a couple of days for him, we interviewed some other guides and then moved on with one of them, named Batubu. The new guide had told of seeing a native defending himself against a lioness. From a description of him, she was sure he was Tazam. Batubu had screamed and beat on trees to distract the beast's attention. This had given him a chance to throw his spear and kill the lioness. Batubu himself was nearly set upon by another lioness, so he ran off to safety. Later, he and his friends returned to the spot. The man was not there, and they found no trace of him. Apparently, he had not been killed, because there was no evidence of this. "How amazing," said Nancy. "Then where did he go?" Mrs. Munger replied, "Perhaps he was found by members of some tribe and taken to their village to be cared for." "But he'd be well by this time and could have returned," Nancy said. "That's true," Mrs. Munger agreed. "That is part of the great mystery surrounding Tazam." End of chapter 11.